all that fun socializing comes to an end. We get back into the big one, WW2. Hey, somebody hit those lights except for the one closest to the door. Thank you very much. Okay, what's the last thing in your notes, Sam? December 5th, 1941, right? December 5th, 1941, Jamin. Not December 7th yet, December 5th. So we're going to end today with the Russians being stalled. I'm sorry, the Germans being stalled in Russia because of their, hello, ladies, because of their miscalculation on a couple fronts, pun intended, their miscalculation on a couple fronts, pun intended. We've already talked about the weather. And we always try to relate history to the present day, right? So I don't believe, of course, I find things that are happening every day in life beyond war hard to believe, but I don't believe that we're at the beginning of World War III. Who knows, right? History, life will kind of play out and we'll look back and say, if it ever happened, which I don't believe it's going to, but just like when these things were happening, Hitler was like, hey, I'm going to annex Australia. Whoa, what are we leading to World War? Well, no, just annexing Australia. So Russia, quote unquote, annexing Ukraine. That's kind of what Putin thinks of it, right? The only difference is the people of Ukraine are resisting, even though they're, quote unquote, kind of Russian. Did you know that? Yeah, there's a shared culture and shared history, so that plays into it. But when you lose in war, it's usually because you've underestimated the opponent, right? If you think about every time you study war, you think, well, this army or whatever, this country was more powerful. How'd they lose? Like Germany was the one ready to win, right? How did they lose? They underestimated Great Britain. Everything else was going swimmingly, right? They were building and building. It was like unstoppable, relentless. There's no way they were going to lose, but they underestimated the Brits and their, not just their ability with their Royal Air Force, but their will to dig in, led by Churchill. Now they go into Russia, and Hitler underestimates how many divisions Russia has. How many, he thinks, okay, they're going to have this many divisions to try to protect Leningrad, Moscow, and Stalingrad. But we know what those divisions are, and we know that we have the capability to overcome them. Didn't realize how many divisions Russia would have in reserve. So he's going to face that. And then he also miscalculates, because of that, how long it's going to take. Even though he's 500 miles deep, he's at the doorstep of these three cities. He's unable to get there because something else he miscalculated. Because of the time, now he's going to face the Russian winter, right? And the Russian winter happens to be the most brutal winter that anybody had ever seen in those parts. Whether it was in all history, in recorded, when people started writing down things like statistics about weather, the Russian winter in 1941 came early and came fierce. So we talked about the fact that it got as low as negative 40 degrees. He thought his troops would be victorious and on their way back to Germany. But he miscalculated, underestimated the enemy. Happens in sports too. Right? How does that team beat that team? Because you underestimate the opponent. And no, I'm not talking about last night. That's a totally different thing. Can't bring up sports now. It's all raw on everybody's mind. I'm talking about sports in general. That wasn't an underestimation by either team. That was a really good game. Somebody had to lose, unfortunately. All right. Is this where you left off? Okay. I'll give you the warning about almost 2 minutes in, that if you just want to listen and not look, you can do that. And it's not like war. It's not like blood and guts of war. It's showing you what frostbite actually looks like. Ew. Whoops.
In these conditions, thousands of men can be lost.
I'm gonna switch the camera to. Okay.
Rewind to World War II. The Eastern Front and the German army are at the gates of Moscow. One last push, and Soviet Russia will become Hitler's greatest trophy. But then, Mother Nature saves the motherland. Russia gets slammed by the worst winter in recorded history, and the Nazi war machine grinds to a halt. The Germans were caught in an icy embrace, a frozen fist that was choking the life out of its men, machines, and their morale.
I often think that if you had to pick a campaign hard to exceed in military history for its abject misery, I think that first winter on the Eastern Front for Germans who weren't ready for cold weather must have been worse.
Daily temperatures fell to 40 degrees below zero. German soldiers had not been issued with warm winter clothing. Hitler believed the invasion would be over by winter. It was wrong. Now his men were sitting in trenches, trying not to die of cold.
The Germans were still fighting in their summer uniforms. They didn't have winter clothing, so soldiers froze to death. They suffered from hypothermia.
Their boots had got metal studs in which transmitted the cold straight through the foot. Their weapons didn't work, so the efficiency of the German army fell right off. Conversely, the Russians were much, much better fitted to cope with cold weather because they did it all the time.
The German suffering increased when the Soviets began pushing them back. Conducting defensive operations in open country around the turn of the year, the 6th Panzer Division was sustaining 800 frostbite casualties.
So they're gonna show frostbite. Ew.
Outside became almost impossible.
So you can just listen.
Men simply died at their post, died in trenches.
Unless maybe you're gonna be a doctor in the future and you need to.
Frostbite kicks in at 32 degrees Fahrenheit or below. The skin's blood vessels narrow to help provide greater blood flow to the rest of the body. But less blood flow means less oxygen, which can lead to cell death and the flesh physically freezing.
Frostbite is the actual freezing of human tissue. Generally, it happens in the extremities. The body tends to pull blood flow to the core and to the brain, to the essential organs. That leaves the extremities with less and less and less circulating blood and a higher propensity for freezing. Severe frostbite, full thickness frostbite, where you've frozen your tissue right through the flesh and muscle to the bone, is cause for amputation.
With a hand or foot severely frostbitten or even amputated, your days as an extreme warrior are over.
Yeah.
Frostbite was probably the greatest disabler of a mountain soldier. If you got your hands cold, you can't hold or fire your weapon. If your feet are injured, it's very difficult to ski or climb a mountain. So that's one of those things that immediately you were taught to prevent.
Okay. So why did I show that grotesque thing? To kind of reinforce how awful that winter was. And did Germany plan for that? No. Did Germany plan for, when they had the British and French forces backed up against the English Channel, did they plan for the miracle at Dunkirk? Even if they hadn't planned for it, were the conditions, it's kind of weird, the conditions that week in the English Channel were ideal for the Royal Navy to come across and regular citizens with their personal boats and yachts to come across and complete that rescue, right? It just so happened that things became ideal for the Germans to be stopped. It just so happens that when they were about to take Russia, the fiercest winter hit and stopped them. I'm just saying. How'd that happen? So we pick up today not on December 5th, but on December 7th, 1941. A date which will live in infamy. By the way, just in case you didn't know, Hawaii is not a state yet, right? Everybody knew that? Hawaii is not going to become a state until 1959, our 50th state. Back in 1941, U.S. territory. So an attack on Pearl Harbor, the naval base there on Oahu Island, is indeed an attack on U.S. soil because we have state claim to it as our territory. On December 7th, 1941, speaking of underestimating or military mistakes, or not, the Japanese wanting to establish themselves and expand their empire. Remember we talked about in early 1930s when they went into China, into that, what's the name of that area of China? Manchuria, and they wanted to take control of that land. That was kind of their signal to the rest of the world that we, the Imperial Japanese Army, are going to expand our empire. They wanted to control all of this of the Pacific Ocean, right? By the way, there's a group of islands called the Philippines that have been under American control since the Spanish-American War. So Japan wants to become dominant throughout the whole Pacific. The only possible obstacle to them becoming totally dominant in the Pacific is America, right? So, the flat map is round, right? So here's the west coast of America. You get out here to Hawaii, we're getting closer to Japan, right? Hawaii is a naval base that America has, and if they can destroy that, I mean, they're well on their way to have an absolute complete dominance of the Pacific. So they have this plan that they're going to have this surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, the naval base there, and if they can destroy our fleet there, who's going to stop them? No one. But they miscalculate. And they underestimate. Maybe not underestimate. Maybe just miscalculate. But wait, there's more. Oh, can you hit that light again? I'm sorry.
On Sunday, December 7th, 1941, shortly before 8 a.m., Japan launched a surprise attack on the United States of America by bombing the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii.
Didn't you say you were there, Isaac?
Yeah.
Anybody else there? Have been there?
The base was attacked by 350 Imperial Japanese aircrafts. Though the raid only lasted 75 minutes, the Japanese destroyed or damaged nearly 20 American naval vessels, including 8 battleships and more than 340 airplanes. Over 2,400 Americans died in the attack, and many more were wounded. While the attack on Pearl Harbor was a surprise, tensions between the U.S. and Japan had deteriorated over the decade, in particular with regards to Japan's expansion into China. The plan for attacking Pearl Harbor was to destroy the U.S.'s Pacific Fleet, a move which would give the Japanese time to carry out its plans to keep control of the Pacific without U.S. interference. The shock of the attack without declaration of war enraged the American public and rallied the nation to get behind a war many hoped to avoid. At the beginning of his speech to Congress requesting a declaration of war, President Franklin D. Roosevelt delivered this now famous line.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
On December 8, 1941, One day after the attack, the United States Congress declared war on Japan, officially entering World War II.
Isn't that dumb? How many think that was dumb? Like you have this country, this powerful country, right? That is trying to stay out of the war. And the war's been going on for over 2 years. And you have this powerful country across the Atlantic Ocean and across the Pacific Ocean from even Japan. And why would you wake them up? Why would you want them in the war? You ever think about that? Like, why wouldn't Japan, who has allied themselves with Germany as part of the Axis powers, remember in World War I, they were the Central powers, and now it's the Allies against the Axis powers. Why would they do that? They had Germany, again, they got stalled in Russia, but even though that winter really crippled them, pun intended, even though that winter really crippled them, they were still fighting that effort to take control of Russia. Even though the Brits dug in and held them off, they were still fighting that battle. Remember we said that according to Great Britain, the Battle of Britain ended on such a date, and the Germans said, oh, no, we kept our, it wasn't the Blitzkrieg anymore, but they kept battling. Hitler believed that eventually he's going to wear down Great Britain, and eventually he's going to wear down Russia. He's going to dominate all of Europe, right? And then probably the rest of the world to create this super Aryan race. And if Japan's on their side, why would they want America involved in it? I guess at some point you're going to have to face the fact that you're going to conquer the world. You're going to have to conquer America too. But with me, it's just kind of crazy that they would do that. But sometimes you act crazy when you want to I mean, it's kind of like the definition of being a madman, right? You want to dominate the whole world. So you might be smart, but you're crazy. And the Japanese were feeling, you ever heard the saying, feeling your oats? Like they were feeling really good about their ability to control the whole Pacific, and you take America down. And maybe they did underestimate, again, the resolve of a people. What would America's response be? The whole world knows America does not want to be part of this war. How's America going to respond? Did they count on 16-year-olds going to the recruiting office in spite of the draft and signing up to go fight in the war? As soon as they heard the news that American soil was attacked, the greatest generation rose up, and even at 16, I know someone personally, went to the recruiter office and said, I'm 18. Yes, lied on all the questions so that they can go fight against the Japanese and the Nazis so that we would win the war. Did they count on that? I don't know. Maybe they thought, remember we said Tojo, when he visited America, what did he say about us? What did Tojo say about the American military in general? Give me one word. Weak, right? Compared to how the Japanese army and their discipline and their commitment to fight, like literally unto the death, the honorable dying for the cause of protecting the empire and the emperor. Does America have that kind of will? Well, they did. Like, what would happen today? Have you ever thought about like your generation, even mine, compared to what's called the greatest generation, your great-grandparents that came out of the Depression right into World War II, that they were willing to do that? Would your age be 20-some-year-olds today, 18-year-olds, if they found out that America was attacked, would they go racing? Or would we have to even though one thing we haven't mentioned, America did institute the draft in 1940. Because even though you don't want to be in the war, you have to be wise. And if someday you get dragged into the war, you have to have a system of training in place, right? So we did already institute the draft in 1940, but now we're at the end of 1941. And regardless of draft, course, there were some people that would do anything they could to avoid it, but I'm talking in general. That generation raced to preserve freedom. What do you think your generation would do? Honestly, anybody got an opinion? It's not I'm not meaning, I'm asking you, compared to that generation, probably the last 3 generations after them probably don't hold a candle to them as far as what they went through and the sacrifices they made. But what do you think? Anybody? Are you confident that if something was to happen like that today, that there would be, well, let's relate world history to present history. What has Putin done? Has he underestimated Ukraine? Anybody been following it at all? Now, I don't believe this is the beginning of World War III. Of course, I don't believe he'd be crazy, stupid enough to actually do what he's doing. But I don't believe it's the beginning of World War III. But if somehow, we go years from now and we look back, so, oh man, yep, that was the beginning of World War III. Remember, Putin goes, I don't believe that. But if it was, did he underestimate, regardless of whether it is or not, has Putin underestimated Ukraine? Most people would say yes, right? We're only a week into it, and most people that I hear are like, Putin can't believe this didn't just take a couple days, right? We're going to go in there, we're going to make a few strikes, and we're going to, the Ukrainian people, some people's idea is that he actually believed that because they share such a history and a culture and language even, that some of the Ukrainians would be like, oh, yes, we always wanted to be part of Russia because, of course, Mother Russia. It's called the motherland for a reason. That we always, I don't think he thought it was going to be like Austria. Oh, yeah, we want to be part of Greater Germany. But I don't believe he thought that there would be this resistance. I don't believe he calculated. I think he did underestimate that right now in Ukraine, all the houses, they're literally not soldiers. They're just regular citizens. And they're trying to arm as many as they can of them and teach them how to use their weapon because literally, if the Russians show up at their doorstep, boom, one of them's dying. That's the resolve that they're showing. By the way, it goes back to leadership. The Zelensky guy, the leader of Ukraine, is front and center, going on media, social media, whatever it is, and holding himself out there as I am the leader of this country, and you are not going to defeat us. And we meaning the United States and the rest of Western Europe and this alliance called NATO, have offered to come and get him out of there. Because while this bombing's going on, supposedly the Russians have we have special forces, well, they have special forces, right? And there's a special force that their whole mission is to take out this Zelensky guy. So right now, you wake up tomorrow morning, is Zelensky even still alive? Have they taken him out yet? Because that's kind of one of their missions, right? So he's like, no, I'm not leaving. And that is giving the rest of the country, standing up like that and being that leader is giving the rest of the country that encouragement, that impetus of hope they need to, hey, we just have to keep persevering. Eventually we'll wear them down. They see how the rest of the world's reacting, how it seems like now the whole world against Russia and Putin. Now they think we just have to withstand this as long as we can. Eventually we'll be able to throw them off. But so did Japan underestimate the resolve of Americans who they saw as weak? But no, that generation was full of people. I mean, if I know one personally, I don't know how many thousands there were that did what Mr. McCluggage did, to go and just like at 16, quit high school, lie about, say you're 18, say you graduate, because back then they didn't have the digital database they have now, right? They know everything about you and me, but they didn't have that then, so you could get away with it. They underestimated that, I would think. Here's a quick timeline of the events at Pearl Harbor. Again, the video said 75 minutes, instead of quibbling over a matter of minutes. at 7:55 a.m. Now, they took off from their base much before that, right? But the actual bombing begins at 7:55 a.m. on a Sunday morning, by the way. Any significance to that, do you think? 1941, attack America on a Sunday morning. You think that was on purpose? What might the difference be? Just knowing, I mean, think about life in America. What's the difference between Sunday morning and Tuesday morning? In general, okay, so church, but then what else? Just in general. By the way, this is 1941, not present day. And in 1941 America, you'd be hard to find a gas station open. You'd be hard to find stores open. We were still in the dominated by the Christian ethos of, work 6 days and Sunday is a day of rest. You go to church and then you rest on Sunday. A lot of stores weren't open. So it's different on a Sunday in America than it is on other days. So I'm sure that had something to do with it, right? One thing they didn't take into account, or they miscalculated, was though they destroyed the most famous of the battleships, the Arizona, the one that Isaac probably toured, as it is memorialized now, and they destroyed the Oklahoma, and they destroyed the Utah. They also, in some cases minor, and many other cases severely damaged 15 others. Only those 3 were absolutely destroyed and put out of commission. They did kill over 2,400 Americans that day in that hour and a half, less than 2 hours. Which, by the way, as far as being attacked on American soil, December 7th, 1941 gets surpassed by what's the only other date that every American remembers. And we remember it because we lost more than that on September 11th, 2001, right? Here's a big thing, asterisk. If you're going to take out the American naval fleet, good, you took out some battleships. You need to take out their aircraft carriers. World War II is the first war that's going to be really using air power, right? There were airplanes in World War I, but if you remember the Wright brothers' invention, if you remember back when you first learned about the Wright brothers, the U.S. War Department wouldn't even buy the airplane. Remember those when you learned about that? Like, hey, you got this airplane, the Wright brothers, they tried to sell it to the, who wouldn't want this for war? You have this new invention that you can attack people from the air. The U.S. War Department in 1903 was like, nah, that's all right, we'll pass. What? So then World War I comes, and by that time, the airplane had taken off, pun intended. The airplane had taken off and was put into use in battle. But by World War II, now they're sophisticated and used greatly. But here's the thing. Somehow they didn't realize our carriers were not in harbor that day. They were out doing exercises. You understand what I mean by exercises? They weren't doing jumping jacks. So no pun intended. They were out doing exercise. So they go to bomb our fleet, and our carriers aren't there. In order to conduct a war at sea, you have to have these huge. Anybody ever seen an aircraft carrier? Like you've been close to one? You can see it when you're out there. It's hard to imagine. I can't even really. How many football fields? It's like a city in itself almost. Aircraft carrier is huge. They have to have enough. The airplanes have to land on there, take off from there. Dozens of airplanes that they would hold. Anyway, if you're gonna conduct war at sea, you gotta have these floating bases for your missions to be conducted, right? Well, when they bombed Pearl Harbor, our carriers weren't even there. So sure, where's the statistics? They took out, did I already put our losses up there? Yeah, they took out 15 others, killed all these people, but they didn't get our aircraft carriers. Amazing. Miscalculation. Japanese, they did lose 29 on that day. This is interesting. 29 were killed. There was only one prisoner POW. You know what that stands for? Prisoner of war. There was only one POW taken. That's kind of significant for a couple reasons. One of them, probably, if you remember, we talked about Bushido, and you're basically, you live in honor to your emperor or God. And if you're a military person, you never want to give the enemy the quote unquote honor of killing you, right? Think about that. Like, you'd rather protect the honor of your emperor by being killed in battle. That would be the greatest honor. That's why we have kamikazes that literally go on suicide missions and know that they're flying their planes right into the target because, hey, what better way to go than to honor your emperor, right? But another thing could be, I'm going to take you prisoner. Oh, no, you're not. Like King Saul. No, you're not. Who's that, cyanide? Huh? What's that, cyanide? Any questions, comments? So tomorrow, America is at war. Why is my clock slow? Anybody got their computer open or anything? Like, what's the actual? It is 29? What had happened was,
I think I need to.
physical.
No, I need to take my glove to Dick's and get it steamed again.
Oh, really?
It's broken in,
You
but
got an ejecto mitt.
it's just not. It's just not what it needs to be yet. It's getting there though.
Somebody hit the lights, please. Thanks.
Oh. Oh. I think you meant physically, but you meant like.
Whee! Just one. Hey, were you there last night?
Yeah.
We were right in your backyard. You.